one considers the issue of managing performance, it's very useful to have a couple of key principles clarified before one actually translates this into a process or a system which allows one to manage the performance in an organization. What's apparent to me is that in the first instance, if you want to manage performance, and you need to understand that in the relationship between the self and the other, one can always construct your intent on one of two variables. You can either construct your intent on what you're getting, or you can construct your intent on what you're giving. And what's very important is that what's causal, what sits in your own hands, is what you give, and the effect is what you get. And the metaphor for this is that the archer draws the bow, takes aim, and lets fly the arrow. That's all in the archer's hands. That's what the archer does. That's what the archer gives. And what he gets is the outcome of that process, whether the arrow hits the target or not. Also, that suggests, therefore, that consistent with the idea of cause would be process. It's what the person does themselves. And consistent with effect would be outcome. And that, therefore, you can describe the person's contribution as what they give and the result being what they get. And clearly, if you want a performance management approach or a performance management system, you need to do one which is truly empowering. And in order to achieve one that is empowering, you have to understand that what people get is not in their control, whereas what they give is in their control. In other words, your performance management process has to focus people's attention on what they give. It has to focus their attention on how they cause things, their process, their contribution. So what this suggests, therefore, how we should view results, we're not negative about results, but you have to understand results are about getting, whereas contribution is about giving. And if you're trying to measure, then you say results get measured against targets by using numbers, whereas contribution gets assessed against a standard. So if I want to work out whether the archer is actually doing the best that he could or she could, it means that I have to know what the person should do in order to string the bow properly, draw the bow properly, nock the arrow properly, take aim properly. All of that is a standard. And when the person doesn't act to that standard, then that's the thing that I would assess. How frequently they hit the target or not is really a result issue, which is something that you'd measure with numbers. Now, if we were to translate this insight into an organization, let's assume we've got a hierarchy of 3 people. So here we have a worker, and let's make it a sort of a reasonably straightforward thing to sort of work out. The worker is in a telesales operation, and clearly after a routine period of work, this worker would produce a result. They'd produce a sales result. But if you say, well, clearly, like the archer and the arrow and the target, the result is what the worker gets. The question is, what's the equivalent of the worker's giving? His stringing of the bow. It is basically making all the calls that he's supposed to make on an ongoing basis against a call plan, and to stick to the script, if you like. I mean, that's what the worker does, and that's what achieves the result. Now, if you then ask yourself, well, what is the contribution of the person the worker reports to, like the overseer? It's clear that the overseer produces a bigger result, because that will be a cumulative result of all the workers that are in his area, which basically means to say that bigger result is what he gets. But the question is, what does he give? What sits in his hands? And clearly, the first thing he'll do is he'll do some work himself. Any person in a line position still does certain tasks themselves. It might be a planning job for his boss or whatever, but the rest of what the overseer does happens through the worker. And the overseer's contribution in terms of the whole care and growth idea is to care for the worker, to give the worker the means to do what's required of him, to make him able to do what's required of him, and to hold him accountable. If the question then was, what does that mean for the overseer's boss? Well, the boss also produces a result. This time it's a larger result. It's a cumulative result of all the overseers in her area. That's what she gets. What does she give? Well, clearly she also does some tasks herself, but the rest of what she does gets delivered to her through overseers, which means that her role is to care for the overseer, to give the overseer the means, the ability, and the accountability to do what's required of them. Now, if one then considers this from the point of view of any one of the individuals concerned, so let's go from the point of view of this boss. If you say, from her point of view, the final business result, the final profit or outcome is, if you like, the furthest away from her. That's kind of like the scoreboard of all the scoreboards, if you like. And if one asks yourself, well, where does that final result sit? Is it with what she gets or what she gives? Well, clearly she gets that. And so too would be the case for balanced scorecard. Any balanced scorecard is still an outcome, it's still what she gets. The only time we start getting closer, if you like, to what sits in her own hands is something that you could call deliverables. Deliverables, if you like, straddle the gap between what she does herself and what she gets as an outcome, because they are normally short-term intervals. They wouldn't be longer than 90 days, and they, in a sense, they look at the outcome of significant pieces of process that the boss is engaged in. So if you like, the idea of deliverables spans the interspace between what the person does herself, in other words, the role or standard of her activity, and the final result. What she does herself on a day-to-day basis, that is what she gives. This distinction is useful to bear in mind in terms of a performance management process. Because if you have a look at how we kind of generally see this, we therefore saying that this idea of deliverables sort of sits in the middle. If you really want to empower somebody, it's useful to give them a set of deliverables that give them a line of sight between the results they're supposed to be achieving and what they personally do themselves. In other words, deliverables literally sit at the interspace between contribution and measures. And the way to frame good deliverables is really to understand that when you frame them, there are kind of 4 types of deliverables. First of all, the direct contribution to the results. In other words, tasks the person does themselves. There's a contribution pertaining to the care and growth of others. There's a contribution to collaborate or to set others up to succeed. And then there's a contribution relating to the change in oneself, if you like, one's personal growth. So to give you an example of some deliverables in every one of these 4 categories, so if we look, for instance, at the direct contribution deliverables, now these are deliverables that were actually worked out for somebody who works in our business. She's the lady who runs our surveying division. So the sort of deliverables that you could define for her is that her project plans need to be completed, the budgets need to be submitted, and the succession plans need to be in place. And this is all within maximum a 90-day period. It could be shorter, but maximum 90 days. If we look at the collaboration deliverables that this person could be asked to do, is that they could assist their finance colleague to collect billing information. They could define best practice from a colleague's area and implement it. So actually identify some best practice and implement it. And also share a work-related experience with their colleagues. In other words, have at least one event where they've deliberately shared a work-related experience with their subordinates or their colleagues within this 90-day period. If we now would consider the care and growth deliverables that she would have to contribute to her immediate subordinates, well, she would identify at least one competency to build with each subordinate. She could understand how to conduct a disciplinary inquiry. In other words, by the end of these 3 months, she would be able to conduct a disciplinary inquiry. Or she's gone through the 5 steps of empowerment with relating to a specific decision with at least one subordinate. And then finally, the kind of own growth deliverables would be to complete her own degree, to indicate progress against any health goals that she might have set herself, and so on. How this would translate into a performance management exercise is, first of all, let's understand the difference between process and outcome. So we're dealing still with this person who runs our surveying business in our organization. And her job is to produce an efficient and effective administrative process for surveys. And we can allocate a monetary amount to that, or we can allocate a number of surveys done. We can also say that her job is to establish an organizational diagnostic. We can also indicate how many consulting jobs we would like to have sold by the end of the year against that objective. And what the person does themselves, if you have a look at the process, in terms of having an efficient and an effective administrative process for the surveys, is that she has to do an initial engagement with clients. She has to ensure that there are no firewall issues. She has to launch survey campaigns. She has to monitor and provide feedback to clients and consultants, timelessly address problems, close surveys and generate reports, send reports for writing with appropriate deadlines to her subordinates, obviously, question and answer written reports before printing and sending, and then finally maintain a database on the drive. In terms of establishing a new instrument, which is this organizational diagnostic, she had to meet with the CEO to create a product and to put it on the shelf, to find an opportunity to do a pro bono organizational diagnostic, to establish how to generate a professional and impressive report, complete the deep mining report, that's a report for a client, and to get buy-ins to the service from the consultants. If what you have on the left is her process, what she does, and the big outcomes is what you have on the right, the question is, well, then how do we kind of paste this into 90-day deliverables that would be at the interspace between the process and the outcome? Deliverables that she should have at the end of the 30 days that would help her to achieve the outcome that we want is that project plans are submitted by January. Her finance colleague is assisted to collect billing information, that's from clients. That a learning opportunity for the quarter is identified for each one of her subordinates and along with a coaching plan, and that best practice is identified and communicated to all. In terms of the new organizational diagnostic, this person really needed to develop their own statistical knowledge, so they need to complete the statistics course. And then also she needs to go through the 5 steps of empowerment, which is an empowerment tool that we use with every one of the potential users of the system. Now, the next question one can then ask oneself, so what are the criteria? What are good criteria for deliverables? And the first one is that you need to have a line of sight, that contribution is in context of a specific set of results on the scoreboard. Secondly, they need to be unique. I mean, only one person should be accountable for any one thing. They should be specific to an individual at a point of time. They should also be specific and concrete. In other words, you should be able to answer the question, was this delivered or done? Yes or no? And if it was done, yes, was it on or above of standard? They should be appropriate to the role or the level of the person. They should be manageable by stretching. If the person is on standard or above standard on each accountability, then the accountabilities aren't stretching enough. They should be time bound. They should be specific to the next specified period or appropriate to the reporting cycle. And finally, they should be forward focused. They should clarify what is expected of the person now and in the foreseeable future.